Good day with your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. The Ministry of Education and the Guyana Teachers Union say that teachers should evaluate education officers. The United States is helping to stop the flow of drugs and illegal goods through Guyana's ports. In the region, an archaeologist is searching for evidence that Amerindians once lived in an area of Antigua now earmarked for a special economic zone. And you'll be getting your latest international bulletin coming from the BBC. Do stay tuned for the details.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. Minister of Governance and Parliamentary Affairs Gil Teixeira on Monday secured House Speaker Manzoor Nadir's approval to refer 8 opposition A Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change APNU plus AFC parliamentarians to a committee to face possible disciplinary action. Of the 8 opposition parliamentarians, the Governance and Parliamentary Affairs Minister singled out Annette Ferguson and Mr. Vincroy Jordan for removing the mace.
And whereas, honourable members, Annette Ferguson and Vincroy Jordan further committed breaches of privilege by forcefully, unauthorizedly, and in a disorderly fashion, removing the mace from its rightful position and attempting to remove it from the chamber, thereby creating grave disorder and chaos, which resulted in injuries to a member of staff of the Parliament office and damage to the mace.
Ms. Teixeira also cited Ms. Tabitha Sarabo Halley for allegedly damaging equipment in a control room at the Archaeology Conference Center, where parliamentary sittings are being held due to COVID.
And whereas Honourable Member Tabitha Sarabo Haley committed contempt and breaches of privilege by unauthorizedly entering the communication control room of the Arthur Chung Convention Center, which is the chamber, a part of the Chamber of the National Assembly as proclaimed by His Excellency the President since September 2020, and destroyed several pieces of audiovisual equipment being public property with the intention to disrupt the sound and internet connection so as to affect the Assembly from conducting its lawful business.
For its part, APNU plus AFC had hoped to get a motion considered for 21 government parliamentarians to be referred to the Privileges Committee, but Mr. Nadir said the motion appeared on a press release letterhead of opposition leader Joseph Harmon. Minister of Education Priya Manichand and the President of the Guyana Teachers Union GTU Mark Light on Monday, International Education Day, said that teachers should be allowed to evaluate the performance of education officers. Appearing on News Talk Radio Guyana, Demerara Waves Online News, Ms. Manichand was responding to a question about the likelihood of education officers being anonymously evaluated against the backdrop of plans to license teachers.
It shouldn't have to be anonymous. You see, that's part of growth. I mean, if we begin with anonymous evaluations, then we should certainly aim to phase that out after a while. There should be no hesitation in holding each other accountable. If we measure and evaluate and we're not seeing from any of those what we should see, then measures must be taken to make sure what their output was intended we get, or else it's our children or our nation that would suffer.
And the president of the GTU, Mark Light, says his union will be proposing to the Ministry of Education that teachers be allowed to measure the performance of education officers.
We have some very good education officers and we have some extremely bad ones, and that does not augur well for the system if they are to supervise our teachers. And so we would like to see very much a system put in place where teachers can also play a role in assessing the performances. That has not been rolled out, and we will be putting that to the Ministry of Education going forward, that there is need for such to happen. We have education officers who do all manner of things within the system, and because there is no standard to which they are held, they get off with it. And so putting an appraisal system in place will keep them in check and allow them to provide that kind of professional support needed for the education sector.
President of the Guyana Teachers Union, Mark Light. The United States, through the Department of State's Office of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, INL, yesterday kicked off a 6-month program to strengthen Guyanese port security and container control. The U.S. Embassy here says the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, UNODC, Container Control Program, in partnership with the World Customs Organization, is implementing the program. According to the embassy, the aim is to weaken transnational criminal organizations and deter the trafficking of illicit goods. Officials from the World Customs Organization opened the program with a 2-week virtual training course from members of port control units. The participants, who are drawn from the police force, Revenue Authority, Customs Anti-Narcotics Unit, Maritime Administration, and the Guyana Defense Force Coast Guard, are being trained in several areas. These include profiling, targeting, and inspecting containers, and the U.S. Embassy adds that this training will give them the skills to effectively detect suspicious and illicit goods and make sure goods departing Guyana have been properly declared and duties paid. UNODC's Container Control Program works worldwide to promote legitimate trade by enhancing container screening capacities. It provides training, equipment, and access to communications data and tools from the World Customs Organization. The program is part of the ongoing commitment by the United States to the security of Guyana and the region. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is assisting Guyana in conducting research to better understand the malaria parasite and vector. The research is being led by the T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Harvard, and the Ministry of Health. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony says the aim is to allow Guyana to develop 3 new capacities. These are parasite and mosquito molecular surveillance, monitoring spatial temporal distribution of malaria, and monitoring for artemisinin resistance. The health minister says that drug resistance monitoring is challenging for most malaria programs because of financial and technical resources. He says this has hindered Guyana's understanding of artemisinin drug resistance, whether it is absent, now emerging, or pervasive in Guyana, and the research project will help to answer these questions. Former leader of the People's National Congress Reform, David Granger, will be resigning as chairman of a Partnership for National Unity before this weekend. He, however, wants to remain as representative of the list of candidates for APNU plus Alliance for Change, in keeping with the revised Cummingsburg Accord that he would be the representative and AFC leader Kemrad Ramjatan would be the deputy representative for 5 years. Mr. Granger, in his meeting with top officials of the AFC, sought assurance that that was their understanding of the accord. Well-placed sources say that he can resign as early as Wednesday after he meets with representatives of the parties that make up APNU. The sources say that Mr. Granger is then due to meet with the current leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Aubrey Norton. It is not clear yet what all of this will mean for Mr. Joseph Harmon's post as opposition leader. The Ministry of Health had decentralized its monitoring of COVID-positive persons who have been ordered to isolate themselves at home. Minister of Health Dr. Frank Anthony says that with more than 13,500 persons now asked to stay at home to avoid spreading the virus, it is difficult for the Health Ministry at the central level to monitor them.
Well, as you can imagine now, the volume is quite large. So we had decentralized the monitoring of people. So each region has their own responsibility for monitoring the persons within their region. So they have been checking in on those persons. In Region 4, we continue to monitor, and we have the HEOC. They have staff set aside that would normally call to make sure that to get the status of the person, and if by any chance their symptoms are getting worse, to advise them to come to the hospital. But it is challenging because of the volume of patients that we currently have.
Latest available figures show that 173 new cases have been recorded within the past 24 hours. There are 13,644 active cases, with 153 hospitalized. Of that number, 20 are extremely sick and are receiving intensive care. 43 persons have been admitted to several regional hospitals, and 101 are at the Ocean View Hospital at Liliandal. The death toll is now 1,138. Meanwhile, the health minister says that 420,591 first doses have been administered and 308,392 second doses have been given. Now for the news in the region. A Trinidad and Tobago pharmacy expert has been explaining the global shortage of pharmaceuticals. This is due to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on global supply chain movement of raw materials and finished products. More from Ayana Carter of TTT News Online.
The issue of drug shortages as a result of lockdowns and other problems related to COVID-19 has created constraints in the global medicine supply chain and in turnouts. President of the Pharmacy Board, Andrew Rahman, explained why the problem occurred and is ongoing.
One is that the raw materials, which usually come from China, they are having two problems where the producers of the raw material, the factories that are producing it, either operating at half shift so that the factory wouldn't shut down totally if somebody was infected, or in some instances the factories seem to have been totally shut down. And then when the reduced quantity of items are produced, there's a shipping problem to get it exported to the manufacturer. And then when it reaches the place of manufacture, that place is also operating at half capacity.
Even when the medication is produced, another problem, that of hoarding, comes into play, especially in relation to COVID drugs. Further, he said, when a decision is made to export the drugs, shipping issues are met. He explains that the problem was severe and even in the present has not yet been conquered.
It's not even cause you usually get in pharmacies because they be mainly injectables because they were for people who would have been severely ill and need injections in hospital. So it was significant. And for critical drugs to save people, at one time I was questioning whether the increased death even resulted from that scarcity. I think it will be in a cycle where some other things will start to go scarce.
Mr. Rahman explains that some drugs can be used as a second choice for treatment, but in some cases there is no alternative.
That report from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. In Antigua, an archaeologist is trying to determine if an ancient Amerindian settlement dating back to several thousands of years ago may be lurking beneath the ground. Antigua Observer reports that archaeologist Dr. Reginald Murphy has embarked on a study of the area where developers are poised to create the country's second special economic zone. He says the area is abundant with colorful stories from the 17th and 18th century. He now hopes to unlock more secrets from the country's pre-colonial era and answer crucial questions about the intriguing people who called it home long before Columbus sailed past. The area's pristine, fertile landscape, which has never been thoroughly combed, makes it ripe for tantalizing finds linked to archaic age and age communities, ceramic age communities rather, he tells observers. While concerns over the environmental impact of the vast 549-acre development between Jennings and Five Islands have triggered a backlash, the site's possible historical significance has to date received far less public attention. The archaeologist hopes to find something of interest in a patch of mangroves known as the Flashes, which teems with marine life, as that would have been a huge attraction for the pre-Columbian people. A petition aimed at protecting Seafort Beach and surrounding mangroves, which fall within the development, has now garnered almost 2,000 signatures. Here now is your international news coming from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. British police have launched an investigation into whether parties held at Prime Minister Boris Johnson's official residence and other government buildings breached coronavirus lockdown regulations. Announcing the probe, the head of the Metropolitan Police, Cressida Dick, said she understood there was deep public concern about the matter. Mr Johnson spoke about the investigation in Parliament.
I welcome the Met's decision to conduct its own investigation because I believe this will help to give the public the clarity it needs and help to draw a line under matters.
Mr Johnson has faced numerous calls to resign before and after this development. He recently apologised to Parliament for attending one of the drinks events, but a spokesperson said the Prime Minister believed he had not broken the law. The Kremlin has said it's greatly concerned by Washington's decision to put 8,500 US troops on heightened alert because of fears of Russian aggression over Ukraine. President Putin's spokesman accused the US of whipping up tensions, but he said the decision would not impact ongoing diplomatic steps. The American troops are on standby to reinforce NATO member states in Eastern Europe if necessary. Lithuania's Deputy Defence Minister, Margiris Abukevičius, says this is an important moment for NATO.
In the current circumstances, allied solidarity and deterrent measures are really key. I think it is really important that allies, NATO countries support Ukraine. But it is also important that NATO shows that it can quickly reinforce NATO as an alliance, and NATO countries in the region now face a direct threat because we have Russian troops in Belarus and we have a common border.
Millions of people in the Central Asian nations of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan have suffered power cuts when interconnected regional electricity supplies were disrupted by a grid failure in Kazakhstan. Danny Eberhard reports.
The failure has caused major disruption across parts of southern Kazakhstan, including the biggest city Almaty, but also in its southern neighbours, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. It's caused flight delays at the airport in the Uzbek capital Tashkent. The city's metro system was also hit, leading to traffic jams as people turned to their cars. Skiers at one Uzbek resort were left dangling in cable cars. It also hit the internet and water supplies in some areas as pumps stopped functioning.
Lawyers for Benjamin Briere, a French citizen detained in Iran, says he's been sentenced to 8 years in prison on charges of espionage. Mr. Briere was arrested while on holiday in Iran in May 2020 after flying a drone near the border between Iran and Turkmenistan. His lawyer says he's been on hunger strike since last month and is very weak. World News from the BBC. The International Monetary Fund has downgraded its forecast for the global economy. It trimmed 0.5 point off global growth, cutting it to 4.4%, saying the world's two biggest economies, the United States and China, won't be immune. India and Japan, however, are forecast to buck the trend. The IMF said Omicron will continue to be a drag on growth. It's now emerged that 2 children, aged 6 and 14, are among those killed in a crush outside a stadium at an Africa Cup of Nations football match in Cameroon. The president, Paul Biya, has ordered an investigation into the disaster, which occurred when supporters tried to force their way into the Olembe Stadium in the capital, Yaoundé, before a match between Cameroon and Comoros. 8 people died and dozens were injured. John Bennett was in Cameroon to commentate on the match.
Like everyone else inside, we were oblivious to what had happened, really. News started filtering through late in the second half. There'd been some sort of incident outside. There were photos and videos on social media, and also reports that a number of children had lost consciousness in the crush.
Russia's chief spacecraft designer says from next year, Soyuz rockets will be able to reach the International Space Station with just a single-loop approach. This would mean faster travel time and using less fuel. In October 2020, a Soyuz craft reached the ISS in 3 hours instead of the usual 6. Prosecutors in Egypt are questioning a man alleged to have taken an exam in the place of Mustafa Mohamed, a footballer currently playing for the national team in the African Cup of Nations. Local media say security services were alerted to a suspected case of fraud at a private educational institute in Giza. A man was detained. He's reported to have said he was a friend of Mohammed and was trying to help him out. There has been no comment from Mohammed so far. That's the latest. BBC News.
That was your international news from the BBC. Here now is a recap of the highlights. The Ministry of Education and the Guyana Teachers Union say that teachers should evaluate education officers. The United States is helping to stop the flow of drugs and illegal goods through Guyana's ports. And in the region, an archaeologist is searching for evidence that Amerindians once lived in an area of Antigua now earmarked for a special economic zone. And you had your latest update of your international news coming from the BBC. And that was your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.